All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, August 5th, and I'm back with another abbreviated edition of the live show. I actually have something I have to do today, and so I'm gonna do a real quick show here and not keep you real long this time. And it's one of those things where I have to I have to finish up this show kind of quick and then take off and do some stuff. So no worries. Next week I'll be back to spending some time and taking our time. But today I just want to take a quick look around the open trades, maybe look at a couple of these closed trades that just got closed this week, and so real quick, let's dive into it here. I'm going to try and get through this as quick as possible. So this morning, the S&P, we had a little gap up, and we got a little push higher, and S&P's at 33.24. S&P's actually at 33.2473. So sometimes this chart doesn't always keep up with the exact price. But here's the interesting thing, right? So the gap from back in February. The low here is 33.2845, and boy, we've come really, really close to filling this gap. So I drew this green zone here where the gap is that you can see. For all intents and purposes, the gap is basically closed. It'll be interesting to see if it actually closes it to the penny or a little bit more or whatever. So pretty amazing here. Here's the uptrend line, which I believe I talked about the past couple weeks. And as long as the market's trading above that uptrend line, it's in an uptrend, and there's no reason to suspect that things will turn nasty. Now, of course, it could have very easily broken here recently, but it didn't. And so if you're going to be objective about following the trend and following the market, regardless of all the crazy stuff going on out there and the news and what you think might happen. I mean, given the situation, you'd think that the market would be struggling, but it's not. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, so at some point, this trend line could break. Obviously, it'll get extended out. So, I mean, just look at the Qs, right? So the S&P is basically, up a couple of percent on the year. So the Qs, there was the previous high. There was that gap from back in February, and you can see how, it kind of filled the gap and then just kept going, right? So S&P's got a lot of catching up to do to, you get the V bottom and then the continuation here, but the S&P is just, basically still working on closing the V bottom. So pretty wild actually, but it is what it is, and the relentless sort of strength that we've seen in the market is certainly mysterious, but again, it's follow price and follow the trend. It is what it is. So anyway, let's dive into the open trades. We got one that is basically just triggering today, which is Netflix. So I figure we'd start off and take a look at that. I think looks back here, that worked out pretty well, right? Last trade in Netflix worked out great. Filled, hit the target, and then finally came down and tagged the stop. So anyway, so for today, the entry in Netflix, the trigger price, I should say, is 503.50. And so let me zoom this down a little bit. 503.50 is going to be basically, down in this area. So yesterday we got the close above that. I will mark it on here. The trigger price closed above the trigger at 503.50. And so basically that means Netflix is a buy this morning right around here, right in this area. Buy at the open, buy shortly after the open, anywhere in this little area. We don't sweat the small stuff, right? Because the idea And actually, this is kind of a sweet pattern, really, because you had the big run up, and then you had sort of the pullback and the trend line break, and you got there's a real nice pivot low right there. Interestingly enough, and then you got a little pop and another little pivot low right there. So the change in trend is basically underway, and so obviously the key is how much follow through it's going to get, but looking pretty good. So let's see where the system has calculated the initial stop is at 483. So that's a pretty tight stop, actually. 483 right down here. I'll mark that on the chart. So this is the new triggered trade for today. So I'll mark that real quick. Initial stop 483. So there we go. You can see the last time Netflix had kind of this sell off and then sort of went sideways and put a little bit of a higher low, and it was a little bit different of a sell off. But anyway, so there was the trigger, like sort of above all these highs. Yeah, a little bit similar this time. It was just above these recent highs, but looking pretty good, honestly. So there we go. Netflix, which you haven't heard a lot about Netflix. I mean, the big cap tech stocks been doing great, obviously driving the whole market, but you haven't heard a whole lot about Netflix recently. I think Microsoft is kind of they talk about the FANG stocks, but Microsoft has been the one dominant in the news here. So anyway, looking pretty good. Basically, this initial stop is a little bit above the last pivot low. However, essentially it's essentially below this trend line to start off with. So looking pretty good. All right, so next but not least, still trying to wake up this morning. I've been sort of rushing around, and like I said, I'm gonna kind of rush through this show here. I'm gonna try and keep it under 30 minutes. So we'll just take a look at these real quick. Since I started at the top here with Netflix, I'll go to VNET, which is the one that triggered yesterday. Right? It's got a pretty nice pop too. This is another one that we've had a prior trade in, but you can see this had a big run up, real nice sort of orderly pullback, and a little trend line break there. It was this was a decent little pivot low. You made a higher low, and so the trigger was 23.30, and that was on Monday. So, you kind of had a long range day there, closed above the trigger price, and then yesterday morning it would have triggered in at the open and put on a bit. I think this thing was up like 10% yesterday, so that was a pretty big day. And you can see this gap up this morning. So the initial stop is still, as of last night, the initial stop is still sitting where it started off with, but after this move, I would imagine this thing will come up fairly significantly tonight. So far so good on this one. Actually, I should probably go ahead and just mark the target on here, which is $28. So basically, let's see, today's high 27.87. So sometimes you get a move like this, and then maybe a little bit of a pullback today, but who knows? This could actually go green today, right? I see this all the time. I do the show in the morning on a Wednesday, and you got red candles or red bars like this, and then by later in the day the thing turns up and goes green. But so there's the target right up there. Not gonna take much to, of course, you do have two long range days in a row and then a gap up. So that's always a little bit of it's always a little dicey, because if there was potential for a pullback, but you can see stock like this, once it gets some mojo going, it's in the past, the last time around anyway, it really made a significant move. So this one's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and mark this on here. Target is $28 even. So there you go. All right, moving on. Another one that's just triggered in here is Nike, and looked at Nike last week. Drew some I think I drew some trend lines here. So basically, to me, the important trend line here is probably this uptrend line. Excuse me. And so, yeah, so far so good. Interesting thing about Nike is that here's the trigger price, 97.80, and so on Monday, it kind of popped up and it closed, closed above the trigger price right here. But yesterday, interestingly enough, the open price was right at the trigger, right? And so in theory, the idea is that, stock closes over the trigger price, you look to enter next morning, as long as it's trading above the trigger, right? And so it opened right around the trigger and popped up a little bit and then spent most of the day lower, but it's still filled because the high of the day, I mean, it traded at the trigger price. So and then, hey, today blasting right through that and looking pretty good. So this is actually a pretty nice pattern here. Big rally, a little bit of a pullback, kind of a consolidation, and the ranges seem to be tightening up a little bit here. And so looks like it's making a little bit of forward progress. And so, yeah, it's looking pretty good. Looking pretty good here on Nike. So interesting, these big cap stocks, name brand, Netflix, Nike. Those are pretty much well followed stocks. So, and the stop on this is very reasonable. Was that a couple of percent? Not very much. So very reasonable stop, and just so happens that it's below this. Now, of course, Nike can be extremely volatile, so tight stops are a double-edged sword, right? Um, Tight stops can knock you out on just normal price fluctuation, but then again, the system knows best, and so the fact that it put the stop like just below that last little pivot low instead of, say this one is kind of interesting. But all right, moving on here. Something called Palomar Holdings, which I'm not familiar with. However, it looks like it's doing pretty well, right? I had a crazy day yesterday. When I looked at this last night. Triggered in over here, right? This was the close above the trigger, and so it triggered in here, and then you had the gap up and that weird sort of fold over candle yesterday. It kind of looked like generally speaking, I'd look at a pattern like that and think, okay, well, that was it. It's ready to come back down, but look at this gap up this morning. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, I would expect this stop will trail up after the update tonight. So let's see. Target on this was only 94.25. I got that right? Yeah, 94.25. So I hadn't even marked the target on here. You guys know that we've talked about this before. If it gaps up over the trigger price significantly, you always have the option of going in half and then putting the limit order in at the actual trigger price to see if you get filled. In this case, you would not have got filled on the second half of it. And of course, the other thing that I've discussed on the show here is that if if you pay an extra buck or something, basically on the entry over the trigger, then you always have the option of adjusting your target up to compensate from that, right? To compensate for it. So that's a nice way to do it. So anyways, there you go. This thing's off to the races and looking pretty good. Basically it broke out here, which is a lot of times these things will have hit a high and then had a little pullback and then they trigger in, somewhere on the resumption of the uptrend. This one's just a little funky here, but boy, this is broken out to the high. Basically, it broke out to the high the day it triggered in. So, all right, moving on. ADI is just kind of hanging, right? I know it's hard to see that trigger in there. Sometimes it's real easy to put the trigger price and all that. It's like not even in the price action, and other times it's just like in the price action. So basically this is still looking okay. The on analog devices, the initial stop here is basically still in play. The price has not escaped enough from the price or the price has not escaped enough above the trigger to have that stop go up yet. So it's a pretty good looking chart, honestly. It's got like a little inverse head and shoulders. I mean, clearly what needs to happen is this stock needs to break through like this resistance area here, but that's a pretty good looking pattern, to be honest with you. So run up, little nice pullback, kind of like I said, an inverse head and shoulders looking pattern, and then so just needs to get some mojo going. The system itself, though, after this pullback, the system detected that there's a potential resumption of the uptrend, and that there's a good chance that this thing will cut back up, and so I mean it didn't. The system itself didn't wait until it broke out of it broke through here, and so it just sometimes you'll see that there's some resistance overhead, and the system will wait until that resistance gets taken out, and then other times it doesn't. It just depends on all the calculations going on in the back end. So all right, moving on here. So analog devices looking pretty good, got some potential here. Nothing too exciting happening yet, not like some of the others. ZTO's been open for a while, since 729 here. So you can see the trigger price here, and there's a lot of resistance like up in this area. I mean, so far so good, right? Stops come up. It's made a little forward progress. See, the target on this came really close to the target, 38.25. It might have actually, let's see what the high here is, 38.12. So that target's like just overhead up here, not too far away. Today, I mean, here we are, what, 15 minutes, or well, 45 minutes into the session. So looks like it's kind of pulling back a little bit, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. Go ahead and mark that on here. 38.25 for the target. Easily doable. Easily. So you can see, this little sort of pivot low here, and then it starts marching higher is it's kind of similar to, it's kind of similar to here, other than it just took off. But once it starts marching higher, it tends to go for a while, or it has in the past. So obviously, past performance is no guarantee of future results. However, so far so good. Price is sitting, above this. This is doesn't look like an extremely volatile stock. You can see back here. There was a pretty nice trade in this, and it caught it like it basically, similar sort of thing. Caught it right at the beginning of a run that turned out to be huge. Now I'm pretty sure, I don't have it marked on here, but back over in this area somewhere would have probably been where it got stopped out on the pullback, right? That sell down there, which was extremely dramatic at the time. If you took off the rest of this off the price scale, that was a pretty big run up, and then obviously it hit the target, right, and then just got knocked out here. So anyway, looking pretty good. Moving on, XOP. XOP's just kind of been boy, it's just been consolidating sideways, and the initial stop still just hanging right in the same spot that it's always been. But quite honestly, this is looking pretty good. Today, as a matter of fact, it managed to kind of pop above, these prior highs here. Even though today's red so far, um, the high is above the high of the last, few weeks, right? Actually, quite some time. This is today's it's tagged the highest high since back in late June. So maybe there's something going on with the energy stocks. Little nibbling on the energy stocks or something. So this is the only ETF in here right now, and looked a little bit dicey last week because it basically triggered in and then just kind of faded back down, and we know that we know how weak the energy stocks have been compared to the overall market. So zoom back here. Yeah, so I mean, here's the beginning of the year, right? So we had the massive sell off and then a pretty decent rally, but the everything else looks like a big V and is already back near the highs, whereas several of these sectors, energies, financials, some of the sectors, they only made it so far, and that was it. What's really interesting about energy is how it got that extra little push here, like in early June. I mean, that was a huge move for a couple of days there, and then just faded it all back down. But there's a pretty decent base being carved out here, and that's actually a nice looking pattern. So just needs to get some follow through. And so this initial stop is just basically kind of below the pattern here, and so I kind of like the look of that. It's honestly, it's not very much over. So what, a buck over the initial trigger price, and right now, and looks like it could come back in. So still looks totally viable. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Looks totally viable. Moving down the list, we got two more. Honeywell. Honeywell came like really, really close to trigger price down here, 146, and then it popped up here and kind of did what it did, and it filled the gap, this gap right here, and then this low yesterday, pretty amazing because when I looked at this, it almost looked like it hit the stop, but yesterday's low is 146.21, trailing stop at 146, and today it's actually getting a little bit of a bounce here. So if it's able to rally from here, then be looking pretty good. So there you go. Interestingly enough, Honeywell, I guess, called an industrial, and the industrials have only bounced back so far. There's no V-shaped recovery in the industrials yet. So yeah, there may be some sector rotation, and I think that there's always a little bit of sector rotation going on, but if the industrials and energy catch a little bit of buying here, maybe some rotation out of some of the big cap tech, then these things have some potential. So last but not least, CNTA, which I had this box shaded last week, this big box on here, and look at this. It finally broke out of this box to new highs, right? When I say new highs, basically you got to go back. Geez, this is January 2019, right? So this is a year and a half ago. It's right up against the high from a year and a half ago. So so I mean, it's basically pushing a 52-week high, sort of. They're tapping on the 52. Yeah, hit the 52-week high, but it's pushing on these highs that go back a couple of years. This chart's 2 years right here. So there's bound to be some resistance up in this area, but the good news is that The good news is that it plowed through the target, right? You can see I got the target marked on here, thicken it up a little bit. There we go, 34.50. So far so good. Here was the entry. This is actually the oldest of the open trades. So it triggered back here. It's been a long time, just kind of, it poked at the target after a couple of weeks, but it's been a long time just sort of consolidating in this area, and basically like this big giant box here, right? Now it's breaking out and looking pretty good. And so anyways, the stop is, way up here. The trailing stop is moved way up here to where the target is, and I would expect probably move up a little bit more today. So looking pretty good. Nothing wrong with that one at all. And it's kind of, that's one of the cool things about the system is it's going to stick with a stock as long as it does okay. So cut your losers short, let your winners run. All right, just real quick, I want to take a look at the last couple of closed trades. I still got a couple of minutes here. So this QLYS and QGEN, these were both really, really nice winners. So just want to take a look at this. We've talked about this so many times. Basically, the trailing stop on this, let me think about this. Trailing stop was a 122.50, right? So it got tagged yesterday. Yeah, it got tagged yesterday. There's a couple I didn't mark on here, obviously. So the trailing stop. When a stock makes a move like this and just sort of goes parabolic, sometimes sometimes you'll see a parabolic stop, sometimes you'll see the trailing stop basically just like follow up, basically just like right under the previous day's low. Just sort of depends on how the move happens. But yeah, this was trigger was way back here, 105. Had some volatility. The trailing stop hung back just enough, then it made this sort of parabolic move here, and so the stop was kind of trailing up under these previous days, and then so there you go. Yesterday it got tagged. I might as well mark that on there while I have it. So the T stop was 122.50, and amazingly enough, like yesterday's low just kind of tagged that, and then it turned around, like I was talking about these things going from red to green. So all in all, nice 16% gain in that, and quite honestly, still looking halfway decent. And then finally, I'll wrap it up with this. QGEN, and this is this is pretty amazing. Now I don't know if earnings came out. I wasn't really paying attention. I think they did, but this is a pretty interesting. This would be a good case study, right? Anyway, the trigger was way back here, right? 43 bucks, and kind of meandered around or whatever, and then like about a week later it just started running up, like basically just went parabolic, right? Just started ripping higher. And so look at how these stops trailed up. There's the target back here, right? Target 45 bucks. So it blasted through the target and then just kept going, right? And even here towards the end, a couple days it looked like it was ready to fail and roll over. And so that's why it makes sense to sort of stick with this trailing stop. And so you can see what happened. The trailing stop basically was able to keep it in for the bulk of the move, and then this was, man, that was like what do you call it, like a sort of a blow off top. But you just never know. You could have looked back here and thought, well, this is the blow off top here, and then it just kept going. So anyway, this ended up with a 16% move. It looks a lot more extraordinary than that just based on the price action, but the volatility, the beta of the stock wasn't really that great, but what a move. And so what's most amazing about it is how is how that trailing stop got tagged at 50 bucks, and then look, it's and that could have been, this could basically be due to earnings. I haven't checked yet. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that this was one where earnings were set to come out, and so earnings may have come out like, the day after or yesterday or whatever, the day before. I don't really know, but look at how much of it it's given back already. So as dramatically as it ran up, it's kind of coming back down. So anyway, this was a really interesting one, so I just wanted to go over that. So anyhow, that's my quick show for today. Appreciate you tuning in. Sorry I didn't have more time to talk your ear off like I usually do, but basically covered it there. Covered the open trades, took a look at the last couple of closed trades there, and so that should be it. The markets, we're in August. Market's a little bit getting a little bit dull here. It's up in sort of, it's definitely run up to, some resistance or whatever as far as the S&P goes, and a lot of weird stuff going on, but it is what it is. So seems like the picks have been doing pretty good lately here. We have a handful of open trades, and so we just check it and see what the system decides it wants to do, and I'll see you guys back